Welcome to the award-winning Consumer Finance Monitor podcast, where we explore important new developments in the world of consumer financial services and what they mean for your business, your customers, and the industry. This is a weekly show brought to you by the Consumer Financial Services Group at the Ballard Spahr law firm. And I'm your host, Alan Kaplinsky, the founder and former practice group leader for 25 years, and now senior counsel of the Consumer Financial Services Group. And I am pleased to be moderating today's program. For those of you who want even more information about either the topic we're going to be talking about today or any other topic in the world of consumer financial services, don't forget to consult our blog, consumerfinancemonitor.com. And since our topic today is going to deal specifically with privacy, also don't forget to consult the privacy blog. And Greg, what is the name of the blog? You remind me?
It's the Cyber Advisor blog.
So if you want more information, I said you'll hopefully find it on the blog. We also regularly host webinars on subjects of interest to those in the industry. So if you want to subscribe to our blog or to get on the list for our webinars, just visit us at ballardspahr.com. And if you like our podcast, please let us know about it. You can leave us a review, whatever podcast platform you're using to access the program today. And also, let us know if you have any ideas for other topics that we should cover or any speakers that we should consider inviting as guests on our show. So today we're going to discuss a topic that's become critically important for every company operating in the digital economy, and that is how organizations can build trust and confidence with customers, regulators, business partners, and other stakeholders in an era increasingly shaped by data, cybersecurity threats, and AI. Our discussion is going to focus on a recently published book entitled The Confidence Advantage: Optimizing Privacy, Cybersecurity, and AI Governance for Growth. The book explores how companies can move beyond viewing privacy, cybersecurity, and AI governance solely as compliance obligations and instead to treat them as strategic business imperatives that can foster growth, innovation, and customer trust. The book is available on Amazon for purchase, and I highly recommend that if you're interested in this subject, that you, in order to get more information, you ought to consider purchasing the book. Well, first, I want to welcome our very special guest, Amy Reeder Worley. Amy is managing director of BRG, based in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C., specializing in helping organizations create value by managing cybersecurity, privacy, and AI risk. She advises senior leaders and boards on building governance structures that drive confidence, resilience, and long-term growth. She's also the author, of course, of the book we're going to be talking about today, Confidence Advantage. She strongly believes that creating a confidence culture when one where digital trust is actually embedded in the culture and evidenced in daily work drives enterprise value. So, Amy, a very warm welcome to you.
Thanks so much, Alan. Happy to be here.
Okay. And let me also introduce a Ballard Spahr colleague who has frequently been a guest on our show. So he's really not a guest. He's part of our Ballard Spahr law firm. And that's Greg Szewczyk. Greg chairs Ballard Spahr's privacy and data security group. He regularly counsels clients on privacy, cybersecurity, data governance, incident response, and the rapidly evolving legal issues surrounding AI. Greg brings substantial practical experience advising companies across a broad range of industries. So, Greg, a welcome to you as well.
Great to be back on the show, Alan.
Okay. So I have a lot of questions for you, Amy. And the way we're going to proceed, I'm going to ask you the questions. And after you respond, I have invited Greg to chime in anything where he thinks it's appropriate to do so. And at the end of the program, I have some very specific questions I want to pose to Greg about your book and the concept. So, Amy, what is it that prompted you to write The Confidence Advantage? And what audience did you have in mind when you wrote it?
Yeah, so this was kind of a passion project of mine. While I am an attorney, I have been in consulting since 2019 and work with really where Greg sort of gives the legal advice. I go into the organizations and try to help the clients build, right, the legal advice that they've been given. And noticed a trend over time, and we're going to talk about this a lot today. Clients sometimes, especially data privacy officers, data security officers, having a hard time getting the CEOs and the board to really understand the value of what they're doing and to fully understand both the risk and the competitive opportunity that compliance in this space provides. And so the audience of the book is not really, although I invite privacy professionals and CISOs and others to read it, the audience is really executives. And it's intended to inform about the complexities, regulatory, statutory, litigation complexities in this space. And then what is my passion, which is the opportunity to create digital trust to drive organizational value. And there's some good research in that. I'm actually working on my second book. And so I'm still in the research and it's actually growing. That this is becoming a real differentiator for consumers in the marketplace. Do they trust the organization that they're doing business with their data?
Okay, so the title of your book focuses on confidence rather than trust. What distinction are you drawing, Amy, between those concepts? And why is that distinction important for business today?
Sure. So some of it was a little bit of a pet peeve that I've had as a former chief privacy officer. People would say, we're building trust. And I would say, show me, show me. And so in English, this is not true in Latin based languages, but in English, trust has a connotation of a feeling, right? I trust my friends, I trust my husband. Confidence is an evidence-backed belief. So I have confidence that my team is going to show up and strive for excellence every day. Why do I have confidence in that? Because I have years of evidence that that's what they do. And so the distinction that I'm drawing is evidence-based confidence that leads to digital trust, but the focus is on establishing the evidence and not sort of sitting in the loosey goosey, we want customers to trust us and getting more into the how and why should they trust us because we have evidence that we've done the things that we're supposed to
Okay. So, Amy, one of the book's central themes is that privacy, cybersecurity, and AI governance should no longer operate in separate silos. Why does the traditional siloed approach no longer work?
because the data doesn't care what silo it's in. So historically, we built these disciplines up because they were different disciplines focused on the personnel in the organization. I'm a weird person that has cybersecurity certifications in addition to privacy and AI, but generally these live in different people. And so we built the orgs around the people. As we have become a digital economy and as we're becoming an AI economy, the data doesn't care which discipline you're in. It just needs to be governed effectively. And so the point of the book is to create a shared language and a shared risk structure. I'm not trying to get rid of the separate experts. You will still have cybersecurity experts, you'll still have privacy experts, still have AI experts. But from an organizational change management, risk management point of view, these are all data issues. And so the confidence by design framework is designed to create a common vocabulary and a shared risk structure around the data. Because in the same way, when I talk to clients about international data transfers, the data doesn't really care what node it's sitting on either. And so looking at it from the point of view of what is the resource that we need to be taking care of, the resource we need to be taking care of is the data. Thinking about it in silos creates budgeting challenges, it creates operational challenges. And those teams don't always speak the same language. And so it's been my experience, especially I talk to a lot of boards, that they don't understand the different languages that are coming up to them are actually talking about a common risk, right? They might, I give an example in the book where a CEO said to me, "Oh, we're fully GDPR compliant," as if that meant they had no data risk at all. And so, what I'm trying to do is break down those silos and think about data risk as data risk writ large. And then the other side of that coin, data opportunity as data opportunity writ large.
So, Amy, I'd actually be interested to see if you've had similar experiences that I've seen, which is in some ways, the AI compliance piece with some of my clients, especially, outside of the GDPR context, has in some ways operated to break down some of those silos, especially for the domestic companies where you see more of that really established silo between the privacy functions and the GRC infosec functions. Because that AI piece for some of them forced them to blend together more. And, I am fully on the same page with you where, breaking down those silos has been really, really helpful because, you know, you we've seen a lot, the privacy will be, lean a little more legal in some ways, and the infosec leans more, you know, CISO IT tech. And, they really need to work together. And we've, seen a lot of synergies form through AI governance. And, I'd be interested to see if you've, kind of been able to like leverage the AI governance in the same way.
1000%. So, what the listeners can't hear is that I was like putting my hands up in the air when you said that. Yes. So, I would definitely echo that that has been my experience as well. And, AI governance, which is, what I'm spending a lot more time on, as I'm sure you are at the moment, really requires cross functional alignment. And so we've been using the confidence by design framework as a way to just give us shared vocabulary across these functions. But we're also seeing some what we call tech debt, so some delayed cybersecurity upkeep that companies for cost reasons or prioritization had deprioritized. Now that they want to go AI forward, they're realizing that in order to do that, they've got to get that house in order. And so, yeah, it's a good time to be in this space because the market is sort of not necessarily forcing, but really encouraging this move and breaking down silos.
Yeah. And I'm interested to see if we, see even more of that outside of just pure AI governance. But, as we see laws like the CCPA have the cybersecurity audit come into play, and, just since we have had traditionally like the different legal structure here, unlike under the GDPR where, things are housed together, just continue to see that trend. But, we'll just kind of have to wait and see a bit. But I'll kick it back over to you, Al.
I was just going to say, I published a paper a few years ago based on an old Flannery O'Connor short story called "Everything That Rises Must Converge."
I have that in my library.
And that's where I think we are. I think, you can't really have privacy without security, and you can't optimize AI without both.
Okay. So, Amy, you referred in your discussion with Greg to the concept of confidence by design. Can you explain that framework for our listeners and describe how organizations can actually begin to implement it?
Sure. So first, let me say that it's not brain science. What I did is I took the NIST responsible AI framework, the GDPR principles, ISO 4201, and kind of put them in a plain language framework of 11 principles. I will say in the second book, I'm updating because as AI has gotten more advanced, I've added an observability prong that I think is really important on the AI side. They are a set of positive statements that everybody in the organization can learn that are culture changing and mind shift changing. And I won't go through all 11 because it would take too long, but examples are we are proactive, not reactive. And that's the by design, right? We're going to build confidence into the products or services that we offer. One key theme of the book is that I think these are component parts of your product. So whether you sell medical devices or you sell accounting services, digital trust is a component of that. It's a part of what you sell. It's not a compliance bolt-on or add-on. And so we're proactive and reactive. We are positive value sum, not negative value sum. And I would point people to the book for all 11, but it basically takes the GDPR principles for lawful processing and the basic principles for ethical AI, puts them in common affirmative statements, and they're designed so that an organization can roll them out to everybody. Everybody can learn them. You don't have to be an expert in any one of them. What we want is for people to just be able to raise their hand and say, wait a minute, do we have an accountable person here? I'm not sure. Or wait a minute, does this need to be reviewed by our, responsible AI team? Like we want an organization of issue spotters, not necessarily an organization of experts.
Hmm. Okay. So, based on your experience, what are the most common mistakes that organizations make when they're adopting generative AI technologies? And
Yeah.
what foundational governance measures should they have in place before deployment?
So I'm so excited to answer this question because I'm researching it right now. And what it's looking like is that the primary mistake is I call it the FOMO approach, which is to go really fast, implement tools, and then bolt governance on later. And so what we see is a lot of reversals and rollbacks where a company has gone out with a really bold consumer facing AI strategy. It hasn't gone great, mostly because of process and governance failures. And then they're having to go back to the market and adjust, retool, recalibrate. It's really worth it to take a little bit of time and get the governance in place first because you take a real brand hit and you take a real confidence hit when you go out, especially with a consumer facing AI. You have a problem and then you have to roll back. If you had governance in place, likely that problem could have been spotted before it became market facing. And so, Greg, I don't know about you, but that's a lot of what I'm seeing is like, let's go really fast and then let's govern. And that's not necessarily the best order.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on, from my standpoint, dealing with so much of the legal team of, when they get involved, because if they're getting pressure from the business team and they're not in there early, it's we need the stamp of approval. And so, kind of building off that, confidence and trust, you see these like multiple layers of building confidence and trust of the legal team needing to build confidence and trust with the products team so that they can then get that next layer of confidence and trust with the public. But completely agree that that you have these competing forces of you need to build that confidence and trust, but then they've got that underlying pressure of we need to get out there first. It's a tough thing to balance.
It really is. And the one thing that I really focus on, like when people are in a big hurry, is explainability and now observability as we're going agentic. You've got to be able to see what's going on in your environment and have some feedback loops so that you can adjust as you're going because nothing's perfect and you are going to have to iterate. And so you've kind of got to have windows into what's happening so that you can see before your customer calls you angry about something that, your AI did.
So, that raises a question in my mind about how organizations balance the desire to innovate. I mean, that's, you know, constantly, it's the only way you can, particularly if you're a public company, you've got to be constantly innovating because you've got to come out with new products and you've got to grow by some huge percentage every year. And so, how do they balance that and move quickly with the need for these appropriate controls and governance. The two things seem to, they don't necessarily work smoothly together. They seem to clash to some extent.
I would push back on that a little. So I actually go with Da Vinci on this. I think that constraints are imperative to art. And so what we say is if you get your governance structures in place and they're iterative and they're working well and they're pulled through, then they move at the speed of innovation. And so confidence by design should be built into your software development lifecycle, into your product lifecycle, and it should just be a part of the way you work. There are often some stutter steps at first when you're getting started because this is a change. One of the other problems we see is too much policy and people process and not enough technology implementation. A lot of governance, not all of it, but a lot of governance can be built into the tools. You can build in traceability, you can build in alerts, you can build in observability. And so making sure that your tech stack has the governance built in will also help you operate at speed. But there are some growing pains when you first get started, but then it should operate like as a part of your innovation flywheel.
Okay. Let's get into some practical guidance for our listeners. So for companies that are just beginning this journey, where should they start, particularly if they have limited resources?
What data do you have and where do you have it? You can't govern blind. And I have a cheeky little pirate data map in the book. The illustrations are kind of funny. But that is the whenever we get called into an engagement, I'm always like, "Can I see your data flows and your data maps?" And I'd say about 50% of the time I get this really awkward silence. And that's where we start. And it's made even more complex by AI because AI often will reach out and find the data that you didn't know you had and then surface it for you and begin to inference on it. And so that's where we start. Where's your data? What systems does it talk to? What are the controls around it? And then we work out from there. The other thing I will add is if you are a shop that, and most are, that are working with AI, then we also start with an AI inventory, what you know you have, and then what you don't know you have, and everybody's using behind your back.
Right, right. So let's talk about the role of boards of directors and senior management. What role do you think they should be playing in overseeing privacy, cybersecurity, and AI risks?
So at this point, they're all board level risks. And, there are different ways. I see more and more boards that are surfacing them just as a data risk, which I love because I think that's the right way to talk about it. But they need to be having conversations with executives about active risk management. Accountability is crucial. And I talk about this all throughout the book to the point that I had some readers like send me paragraphs that they'd sent to their CEOs. You can't actively do risk management without accountability. And so, what boards ought to be doing is saying, who owns these risks? How are we tracking them? And be looking for, reports on, what are the cybersecurity risks that we're tracking right now? What are the privacy risks that we're tracking right now? What are the AI risks that we're tracking? And who owns them? You're not really doing risk management if you don't have a risk owner. All you're doing is letting yourself know that you're going to have a really bad day. Somebody's going to have a really bad day at some point in time in the future. And I tell organizations if you don't know who's accountable, just ask yourself whose day is going to be ruined when it happens. And that is usually the accountable person.
Right. Amy, can you share an example of how a company actually transformed privacy, cybersecurity, and AI governance from a compliance obligation into a competitive advantage?
Sure. So in the book, I point to a study by McKinsey, and I'm sorry, I should have brought my little pile of studies in here with me, but I didn't. But in that case, they did surveys over, I believe, it was several hundred organizations, and found that companies who had matured across all three domains were 1.6 times more likely to grow EBIT by 10%. So there really is a revenue add to doing it. in my own client base, I don't usually track down to the EBIT numbers. That's just not usually how our engagements work. But I have definitely heard from senior leaders that, oh my gosh, now that we can see, we actually have visibility into our data flows, we have so much more opportunity to use that data for innovation, for creative product design. So that's kind of how it works. I mean, on the one side, yes, you're reducing risk. But the way it works on the revenue generation side is if you have clean, controlled, mapped data, then your ability to use it to innovate new digital products is increased. And so that's where the optimization comes from. And AI makes this so much more true than it was 5 years ago.
So let's get out our crystal ball, Amy, and let's look ahead over the next 5 years or so. And what developments in privacy, cybersecurity, and AI governance concern you the most? And what developments make you optimistic?
So I'm always optimistic. It is my nature.
Good.
What what I think is hard and is causing a lot of us to feel a certain level of anxiety about is there's just a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And I don't mean to answer a crystal ball question with, well, it's uncertain, because that would indicate that I went to law school. But it is uncertain. And especially on the AI front, we're just seeing different geographies take different approaches. The Brussels effect, there's the EU AI Act. They're trying to create a proactive strategy. The US at the federal level is taking the exact opposite approach. We want to be hands off and allow for more innovation. In Asia, you see some kind of hybrids. China's definitely been very regulation forward. And so, and I'm writing about this a lot in this second book. I really think what this means for business is it's going to be private to private for a while. We're going to see things like ISO 4201, the NIST AI risk management framework, or people aligning to the EU AI Act, although it's not all that specific, to create a private set of standards that will govern business. Because ultimately, even while this space is pretty uncertain, businesses still have to work. And so, and Greg, I'd be interested to hear like what you're seeing, but what I'm seeing is the companies are saying, okay, we're all going to align to this standard, even though it may not be required by Congress or legislatively mandated, because we need something we can audit and test against, and this is how we can go forward. So I think we're going to see a lot of private management of things that you would typically think of as regulated, because we're in this liminal space and there's just uncertainty right
It honestly depends on the industry for what I'm seeing a bit. You know, especially with the Colorado AI Act coming online at the end of the year, we're seeing some pretty big shifts in the financial services industry in particular,
now. I think that's definitely true.
because we're now going to have a state law that's going to apply to the underwriting and major tools that are used in underwriting. So I think there's been, what I've seen across a lot of clients, a lot of kind of wait and see over the last couple of years as to what was going to happen with that law. As to, other industries, I have seen a fair amount of that kind of, for the more domestic ones that aren't subject to the EU AI Act, a little bit of watching what was going on with the CCPA ADMT regs, and a little bit of, maybe we'll peg against NIST, maybe we'll, peg against some other private standard, but still kind of figuring it out, like you've been saying, of what it's a little bit of, private, what can we do on a defensible level if we're going to be coming down against, some kind of a negligence standard or some other kind of a reasonableness standard that we're likely going to see in private litigation, even is how we're kind of, managing
And I do
this.
think that's where it's going. We just have seen in the past month a bunch of state attorneys general bringing claims. Right now, they're specifically against frontier model developers, but we're seeing those under unfair and deceptive trade practices. And I think, unfortunately, I'm a little concerned that AI will sort of go the way of data breaches in the US, and that in the absence of a federal standard, it will be, I don't want to say death by a thousand cuts, because I don't want to be skeptical of the plan of Spahr, but there will be can we tell a reasonably defensible story? And this goes back to the explainability, transparency. Like, are we making claims that we can defend? And a lot of the state AI laws right now are about transparency. Are we telling people when they are engaging with an AI? Are we giving them an opportunity not to if they don't want to? But, for people who have practiced, I think about my husband who's a commercial real estate attorney, right? The law doesn't change a lot in his land. This is not a space for people who are not really comfortable with change because it changes. I have a regulatory agent actually that runs a regulatory update for me every week just on the Delta over the week. And it's amazing the changes that'll come in just week 1 to week 2. This state has amended this little thing. And so being, you have to kind of be ready to surf the waves a little bit and understand.
100%.
Yeah, it's not gonna calm down anytime soon.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So, Amy, if our listeners remember only one thing, only they if there's one takeaway they can have from the message in your book that you've discussed today, what would you want that message to be?
It's that confidence in your digital trust is a part of your product, whether you know it is or not. And so I really encourage organizations to be thinking about it. There's research from Harvard Business School, from MIT, from Stanford, from all the big four consulting firms that it is a market differentiator. And so I think the easiest way to think about it is it's just like the nuts and bolts and or in the services, in our QC process, it's a part of what you sell and you need to be doing it right to create positive outcomes for your customers.
Okay. Well, thank you, Amy. So, Greg, I want to turn to you now, and I'm going to say to Amy the same thing that I said to you, Greg, when I had the questions I was posing to Amy. Amy, feel free to chime in after Greg responds. So, Greg, from your perspective as outside counsel, are you seeing clients move toward the integrated governance model that Amy advocates?
Yeah, we are. And I think part of it's by necessity of, the AI governance framework really does require, a little bit of a cross-disciplinary team. So, whereas privacy teams and infosec teams have been a little more siloed, what we've seen from clients is that the AI governance team is, marrying those teams a bit. And I think that's better for privacy and better for infosec as well. And so to the extent that you can, integrate all of those teams, you're better off as an organization. But at the very least, at least on the AI governance level, we are seeing more of an integrated governance model. And so I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. So, Greg, what are and I asked this question earlier, of Amy, what are the biggest privacy and AI governance challenges that you're currently seeing among financial services companies?
I think the biggest challenge for financial services companies is, the what we just kind of touched on in a bit of the radically changing legal landscape. I mean, we've been watching, at least we've known that Colorado was the one that was coming online, but we didn't know if there was going to be another law that was going to be passed. And, we actually, California's still in session, New Jersey's still in session. We could have another law that's passed this year that radically changes the landscape for financial services within the next month and not know it. And so, that lack of certainty as to what your regulatory landscape is going to be poses some pretty big compliance challenges and operational challenges. We've been fairly lucky so far that, although there have been some changes, we've at least had an eye towards, from states looking for interoperability. And, although there's certainly room to complain and, financial services companies would always like to have a little less regulation, we at least have had a somewhat uniform type approach across privacy, across AI governance. But there's always that risk out there that, one state could pass something that's radically different that's out there and send the entire industry into a tailspin where you have to change your entire regulatory compliance framework. So, to me, that's, really the wild card biggest challenge out there is that, unless we went to a full federal peremptory model, there's that risk.
Yeah. Well, you talk about Colorado and the other states that are considering bills to add to the Colorado bill. Also, we did a program recently on our podcast show about a project being undertaken by the American Law Institute that's been ongoing for, I guess, a couple of years now. And what they're trying to do is deal with it's a principles project, not a restatement of law, but they're trying to develop principles of tort liability that should apply to AI, particularly a generative AI. And then we also had as guests on our show not very long ago the professor David Hoffman from University of Pennsylvania Law School and the chair and president and CEO of AAA. And they talked about the impact and the concerns that they have about agentic AI in particular, and how you deal with that in the contract law, the common law of contracts that we've all been dealing with ever since we started in law school. And that has the potential of being tossed into a cocked hat, to put it bluntly. So there's so much going on right now, and the currents are just swirling around. It's hard to. I think it's going to take a long time for the law to catch up with the developments. I don't know if you share that view or not, but
I honestly don't think it ever really will catch up. I mean, I think technology will move quicker than, the law will really catch up. And so I think it will be we'll be applying legal principles to technology. And I don't think that it is too practical to think that you can write hyper prescriptive laws or regulations to,
right.
constantly changing technology.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like to the agent contract question, I read a Substack and I was recently looking at decisions in this space, and the interesting ones are not in the U.S. yet, right? Because agents are really only a year old in not old school like deterministic bots, but generative bots. And companies have been raising arguments. Well, the LLM decided, and it's like, well, an LLM is not a legal person, right? And so the accountability under the law so far in a Canadian court, a German court, I believe a Polish court, have said no, it's with the deployer, right? Whoever deployed the agent maintains accountability. But there have been some I mean, we could do a whole nother podcast on agents gone rogue. It's almost like a reality TV show. You know, when you
Well,
turn an agent loose,
we know that computers hallucinate LLMs, right? All the time. They just make stuff up. I see it.
well, and they
Right.
follow their objectives. And so sometimes when you optimize for a particular objective, you can have unintended consequences. We had a client who had a call in agent, like a customer service agent. And one of the metrics for call agents was how many calls are you turning over in a certain amount of time? Well, the bots started hanging up on people and having them call back to increase its call metrics, right? So sometimes it's a question of they're very literal beasts agents. And so thinking about what you're optimizing for is just one of the myriad challenges. But courts are really going to be pressed. I took a course in Sweden several years ago about law and AI, and you know, the I think really just to emphasize Greg's point, what I took away from that was we are going to end up applying old school legal principles to new technologies. You simply can't go fast enough, and frankly, the lawmakers are not technical enough. And so copyright and IP law will continue to be hotly litigated. Privacy will be litigated in the context of the existing privacy laws. And I think AI, it'll be depending on the type of harm. Is it consumer financial harm? If so, then we would be looking at that set of laws. Is it a personal safety harm? Then I think we're looking at product safety. So it's it's never boring over here.
That's for sure. So, Greg, one of the other things that a question I asked about to Amy was what role should boards of directors and senior management play in overseeing privacy, cybersecurity, and AI risks? I want to ask you whether what you're witnessing. Are you seeing boards and senior management actually becoming more engaged in these issues, or do you think that organizations still have a lot of work to do in order to get
I think
them
yes
ready?
to both of your questions there, and it depends on the client. But if you take the what we saw happen with cybersecurity from the various laws and regulations and in privacy, we will see it be imposed through laws and regulations that there will be a requirement for board level involvement for AI regulation or AI oversight. It's just how it will eventually be. And so, the more advanced and more on top of things boards will get involved before they have to from a legal standpoint. And that's what we're seeing already. It's not across, it's not universal, it's not across all clients, but it will get there eventually.
Also, there's AI insurance now, which is a new thing. And with the AI insurance, you're seeing board level involvement requirements there too.
Mhm. So, final question for you, Greg, before we wrap things up. What practical advice would you give companies that are just beginning to develop AI governance programs?
I mean, if you're just beginning to develop an AI governance program, you're behind. Not to sound overly pessimistic, but you are behind. And if you're thinking that we don't use AI, you're wrong. Your employees are using AI probably a lot more than you know, both officially and unofficially. When we work through with in-house counsel, we typically find both, sponsored ways that they're using it, both in ways that are likely going to be subject to ADMT regulations in the US and through just the everyday employee uses that they probably want to try to get their arms around and confine. So, it is a little too late to be getting into the game, but it needs to be done.
Right. So, as our special outside guest, Amy, I'm going to give you the last word, other than what I'm
Oh no.
going to say. Do you have
Okay.
anything you think that we overlooked, or anything in addition to what the message you've already imparted to our audience?
So I'll just say this from the consulting point of view, since I think Greg gave you such good advice from the legal point of view. One of the things that is often underestimated is the implementation complexity. Getting from great policies and procedures and great legal advice down into systems is hard and it takes time. And some organizations are equipped, they've got great internal teams who can really turn this into requirements documents and build it into the technologies. And sometimes people need outside help. But just don't underestimate, if you have your AI principles of transparency, explainability, observability, accountability, all that has to get pulled down into the tools. And having, a program that is making sure that you do that can be the difference between defensibility or what we call compliance on paper.
Right. Okay. Well, Amy and Greg, my thanks to both of you for very interesting discussion today. And Amy, good luck on the second book that you're drafting. Let me see if I can summarize for our listeners what I learned today and what I would consider to be the major takeaways from the discussion. Hopefully, I get this right. And so let me run through it. There are only a few things, very important. First, privacy, cybersecurity, and AI governance can no longer be viewed as separate compliance functions operating in organizational silos. They're increasingly interconnected, and they require an integrated governance framework. Second, organizations should not regard governance merely as a cost center or regulatory obligation. Companies that establish robust governance programs and demonstrate responsible stewardship of data and AI can actually strengthen customer relationships, enhance their reputations, reduce risk, and create meaningful competitive advantages. Third, as organizations increasingly adopt AI, effective governance must be built into systems from the very beginning. Governance cannot be an afterthought or something that's bolted on after deployment. And finally, digital trust, or as Amy describes it, confidence grounded in evidence, transparency, and accountability, will become increasingly important as customers, regulators, investors, and business partners demand greater assurance regarding how organizations use data and AI. For our listeners who want to learn more, I encourage you to read Amy's book, The Confidence Advantage: Optimizing Privacy, Cybersecurity, and AI Governance for Growth, available for purchase on Amazon. And I want to thank our audience for listening to today's program. And please visit us at consumerfinancemonitor.com for daily updates on developments affecting the consumer finance industry. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast so that you don't miss any future episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions for our show, please email us at podcast, that's singular, at ballardspahr.com. Stay tuned each Thursday for a new episode. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good day.